What makes a movie truly disturbing? Is it the violence you see on screen? Perfectly timed jump scares? Scenes you wish you could forget? For me, none of that. Nothing is more disturbing than reality. Because when you find out it really happened, and the movie didn't even show the worst part, it stops feeling like a film at all. That's why today, on Top 2 Day, we're diving into real stories where the truth was far more disturbing than anything shown on screen. But before we begin, I need to tell you horrible truth. All this time I was a bot. An AI voiceover called Liam.
Before, I sounded like that.
Now I'm more human, but that's still not enough. To prove that I am no longer a bot, I decided to voice over one of the sections with my real voice and ask you about the feedback. Which exact moment? I will not tell you. Just as water finds the sea without hurry, let this story unfold without rushing.
Be water, my friend.
If you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to like and subscribe. So, let's start from the first one. The Sacrament, 2013. This movie is based on a real event so disturbing that the film inspired by it captures only a fraction of the true horror. The Sacrament is inspired by the Jonestown tragedy, where more than 900 people died after being manipulated by cult leader Jim Jones. The character in the film is based on Jones himself. And honestly, the movie barely scratches the surface of how controlling, paranoid, and terrifying he truly was. What happened in real life was so extreme that fully portraying it on screen would be nearly impossible. This isn't really a film you can spoil, so let's talk about what's shown, why the real events were far more terrifying, and briefly look at Jim Jones and the cult he led. Born in 1931, Jim Jones grew up in a poor family in Indiana. His father was a war veteran, strict and often harsh. His mother was gentle but fragile, struggling to keep the family together. Jim was a quiet, lonely child, obsessed with religion. Even as a boy, he didn't just play church, he held funerals for dead animals, complete with sermons and rituals, preaching to other kids. As an adult, he became a preacher, but not an ordinary one. He mixed Christianity with politics, socialism, and control. He spoke about equality, justice, and helping the poor, and people listened. What makes it even more disturbing is that, for a while, he actually helped people, fed them, protected them, listened to them. So in 1955, he created a community called People's Temple. At first, it seemed like a genuine community. Food programs, housing, support for the marginalized. But underneath, Jones was already testing how much control he could have over people's lives. As People's Temple grew, so did Jones's power. He didn't just lead people, he controlled them, who they talked to, who they trusted, even who they married. There are many more details about abuse, but we are here not for that. Let's speed up till the moment film The Sacrament started. So, by the early 1970s, he moved his followers to Jonestown, deep in the jungles of Guyana. He sold it as a paradise, a safe haven from racism, corruption, and the outside world. But in reality, it was an isolated place where most followers were treated like prisoners and the most loyal as guards. In November 1978, U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan decided to investigate Jonestown after receiving reports of abuse and people trying to escape. He flew to Guyana with a small delegation, including journalists and concerned relatives of followers. Something close to that we can see in the movie, but with key differences. There is no congressman at all. The journalists survive, and what looks like a large group on screen barely reaches 150 people. In real life, Jonestown held more than 900, which is making this tragedy way more terrifying. After Ryan's visit, several residents asked to leave with him, explaining that they felt unsafe and wanted to return home. Jones allowed them to go, at least on the surface, but closely monitored the situation. He understood that their departure could attract attention and encourage others to leave. As Ryan and his group prepared to depart from a nearby airstrip, Jones ordered armed guards to follow them. Gunmen opened fire at the airstrip, killing Congressman Leo Ryan and several others. Shortly afterward, back in Jonestown, Jones gathered the remaining residents and announced that the outside world would not leave them alone. He instructed his followers to prepare a drink made from powdered flavor aid mixed with cyanide and sedatives. As the poisoning began, some people refused. Not everyone agreed. There are recordings of what followed. Jones spoke continuously over a loudspeaker, responding to objections in real time. He told the crowd that if they didn't die by their own choice, the government would come, that soldiers would arrive, and that their children would be taken and killed. Those who resisted were surrounded by armed guards. Some were physically restrained. Others were shot while trying to escape or refusing to comply. Children were poisoned first, many by force, including infants given the poison with syringes. Death was not immediate. Many suffered for several minutes before collapsing. Jones continued speaking as people died around him. The tape kept running. By the end of the day, more than 900 people were dead, including over 300 children. All because of the madness of one man. The movie tried to recreate something very close to these events, but on a much smaller scale. In the film, we see around 160 bodies, and even that looks absolutely horrifying. Now imagine 900 people, including more than 300 children. The real number of lives lost at Jonestown. It's almost impossible to grasp. Here's a generated image showing what 900 people might look like together. Here is not a generated picture, but real. The Sacrament gives you a sense of found footage horror. But real life? Real life is on a completely different level. This case still remains #1 mass life end in the world history. Pain and Game, 2013. For me, this Michael Bay movie and Black Sails are his best works. If you stop and think about what these guys actually did, you realize it's only funny on the surface. It's a story about kidnapping, steroids, and murder. Unfortunately, the stupidity and arrogance of the people involved make it almost hilarious and completely unbelievable at the same time. This is a case and a movie I really like, so today we're covering the entire story from start to finish. Daniel Lugo, played by Mark Wahlberg, was a talented and dedicated gym trainer. In 1992, he landed a job at Sun Gym, where he quickly made a name for himself, bringing order to the chaotic gym and helping turn the struggling business around. His efforts even helped the owner elevate the club from near bankruptcy to success. But Lugo wasn't satisfied. He saw himself as more than a trainer. Instead of achieving his dreams through hard work and dedication, he became convinced that the only way to get what he wanted was through crime. Before the crimes shown in the film, Lugo had carried out several fraudulent schemes with medical insurance under fake names. And thanks to this, he had already obtained nearly $1 million, which would later be found in the possession of his accomplice, Doorbal. I mention this information to highlight the difference between the motivations of Mark Wahlberg's character and the real Daniel Lugo. By the time of the main criminal actions, he already had money. What drove him was power and an obsession with the idea that he was entitled to something more than everyone else. Lugo recruited his friends Adrian Doorbal and Carl Weeks, both of whom were also involved in the gym world. Adrian Doorbal, played by Anthony Mackie, worked as a trainer at Sun Gym and shared Lugo's obsession with money and status. Carl Weeks, a former bodybuilder and martial artist who also worked at gyms and was drawn into Lugo's scheme. In the film, his character is called Paul Doyle, played by Dwayne Johnson, and he is a combination of two more people the movie never shows, Stevenson Pierre and Jorge Delgado. I will tell you more about Delgado, but we will skip the Stevenson Pierre part in this story. It is not that important. Together, they formed the Sun Gym Gang, a group of bodybuilders whose muscles were impressive, but whose criminal skills were almost non-existent. Their plan was simple on paper: target wealthy clients from the gym, kidnap them, and force them to hand over their money. To make it official, they even had a friendly notary ready to stamp whatever papers they needed. The notary, John Meese, was also the owner of Sun Gym, where Lugo worked as a trainer. In other words, Lugo had effectively recruited the gym owner into his scheme. Their first target was Mark Schiller, a businessman and longtime client at Sun Gym. Schiller trusted Lugo, which made him the perfect mark. The gang intended to kidnap him, hold him for ransom, and extract his fortune.
If I understand it correctly, it's a Swiss fucking watch. That's right, dude.
It took them 7 failed attempts just to get Schiller into their car. 7. They followed him for hours, but lost him on the highway. Tried to block his car, the engine wouldn't start. One night meant for the kidnapping ended with them giving up and going to a strip club instead. Another night, they rehearsed their plans so badly that they accidentally set off a burglar alarm in the wrong house. After the 7th failure, a furious Lugo snapped and swore they would kidnap Schiller that very day, no matter the cost.
What the fuck do you want?
When they finally managed to grab Mark, they were absolutely furious and almost killed him on the spot. Enraged at their own incompetence, they dragged Schiller to a warehouse and began to torture him. The gang had hoped he would break quickly, sign over everything, and hand them his money without any real pressure. But Schiller turned out to be much tougher than they expected. As they began to apply physical and psychological pressure, they quickly discovered that breaking Schiller would not be as easy as they imagined. Let me explain what exactly they did to him. For almost a month, the Sun Gym gang tortured him relentlessly. He was beaten repeatedly, shocked with tasers, and at times blindfolded or had duct tape cutting into his skin. The threats escalated constantly. Schiller was told that if he didn't cooperate, they would bring his wife and children to the warehouse, harm them, and chain them next to him. Despite all of this, Schiller refused to give up at first. But after weeks of constant pain, psychological terror, threats against his family, sleep deprivation, and sheer exhaustion, he finally agreed to cooperate. He was forced to dictate lists of his assets, bank accounts, and investments, all while blindfolded and with guns pressed to his head as he signed documents under extreme duress. One signature, for example, was so chaotic that he scribbled it vertically along the dotted line. But that didn't concern them, because they had a Mies to approve this type of signatures. By the way, it's important to mention that Schiller was betrayed by his own best friend and colleague, Jorge Delgado, who had recommended him to Lugo in the first place and later gave the gang key details about Schiller's assets and routines. This betrayal made it much easier for Lugo and his gang to manipulate him and pressure him into signing over everything. In total, they managed to steal over $1.2 million in cash, property, and assets from Schiller. Convinced they had won, the gang celebrated their success. But there was still one unresolved problem: Mark Schiller himself. There was only one solution in their minds, and for that, they came up with yet another brilliant plan. One that, like everything else they touched, would go horribly wrong. They decided to stage a drunk driving accident that would kill Schiller and make it look like his own fault. In the early hours of December 15, 1994, after 3 days of forced drinking, Schiller was placed in the passenger seat of his own car. Lugo moved into the passenger side, stomped on the gas, and steered the car toward a concrete utility pole, jumping out at the last second before the collision. When Lugo checked the wreckage, Schiller was alive, though unconscious. Why and how? Because Doorbal had strapped him in. Yes, that logically saved his life. So that's a clear lesson. Always fasten your seatbelt when driving drunk. Something is not quite right with this advice, isn't it? So, after that, once Schiller survived the first crash unharmed, Lugo went furious and decided to set the whole car on fire with gasoline. He poured the fuel over Schiller, expecting the flames to finish the job. But miraculously, Schiller managed to open the car door and climb out, escaping the inferno. Fueled by panic and rage, they jumped into their cars and chased him down the street, running him over twice as he struggled to get away. Each time, Schiller survived, barely conscious and bleeding, crawling to safety. They almost struck him a third time, but a passing vehicle appeared, forcing them to flee the scene. Exhausted, terrified, and seriously injured, Schiller survived what should have been a fatal attempt on his life. After surviving multiple brutal attempts on his life, Mark Schiller woke up in a hospital, severely injured. But when he tried to tell the police what had happened, no one believed him. His story sounded too extreme: kidnapping, torture, repeated murder attempts, so authorities dismissed it entirely. Also, he was born in Colombia and later moved to the United States, which investigators at the time didn't like either. By the way, unlike in the film, Schiller didn't recognize Lugo by his cologne, but by his distinctive manner of speaking. He was 100% sure it was Lugo, and Delgado as well. Schiller wasn't an idiot. He immediately understood how the kidnappers had so many personal details and why Delgado now controlled parts of his many businesses. Refusing to give up, Schiller hired a private detective named L. Dubois, who began digging into Daniel Lugo and his crew. Within days, Dubois uncovered crucial evidence: financial records, notarized documents with forged signatures, and clear links between Lugo and the gang members. There was also a fascinating coincidence that the movie never mentioned. While reviewing the documents, Dubois recognized the notary who had helped the gang. That notary was John Mies, the owner of Sun Gym. Mies was Dubois' former classmate, and their offices were located on the same street. Dubois arranged a meeting with Mays and confronted him with the most obviously fake signatures imaginable. Mays claimed he had nothing to do with it and said he knew nothing about Schiller. As for Daniel Lugo, he described him only as a good person. Delgado, Schiller's business partner who betrayed him and wasn't shown in the film, Mays said he knew only as a gym client. Dubois never believed him. Meanwhile, Lugo was successfully living in Schiller's luxury home. The neighbors were suspicious at first, but Lugo confidently told them he was an undercover CIA agent. According to his story, Schiller had committed a serious crime and had been deported, while Lugo was assigned to watch over the property. That explanation, combined with generous donations to the local homeowners association, convinced the neighbors. Just like in the film, Lugo also began dating a stripper and former Miss Romania contestant. Throughout their relationship, he told her elaborate stories about working for the CIA, and she believed everything. Because of her cooperation and lack of real knowledge, she was later acquitted in court. So, despite obtaining direct evidence from Lugo's own office, the police still refused to pursue the case. They mocked Schiller, called him an actor, and continued to bury the investigation. At the same time, the Sun Gym gang grew completely reckless and planned a second crime. Their next victim was businessman Frank Griga. Lugo told his girlfriend Sabina that they were about to kidnap a dangerous terrorist and that she had to help. Believing she was doing her patriotic duty, Sabina actively assisted. The gang purchased guns and powerful horse tranquilizers right in front of her. They successfully lured Frank Griga and his wife Christina to Adrian Doorball's apartment. There, Doorball took Griga into another room. An argument broke out and Doorball lost control, killing Grig on the spot. Unlike the film, this was not an accident. It was intentional. And it was not Lugo who killed Griga. It was Doorball. After sedating Christina, Lugo decided they should at least profit from the situation. They waited a day, and after beating Christina, they forced her to give them the safe code. Lugo then drove to Griga's house with Delgado, the same accomplice who had betrayed Schiller and was never shown in the movie. When the code didn't work, Lugo called Doorball to ask for the correct one. Doorball replied that Christina wouldn't be saying anything anymore. The gang then went to a hardware store and bought supplies totaling exactly $666. The infamous scene of burning severed hands was real, but in reality, Lugo did it himself. Carl Weeks had no involvement in the second crime at all. 8 days after Frank and Christina Griga disappeared, Detective Dubois received a call from police contacts. They were investigating a missing persons case, and one of the suspects was the same man Schiller had accused years earlier. This time, no one laughed. No one talked about fantasies or acting. Almost the entire gang was arrested the same day. The leader, Daniel Lugo, managed to flee to the Bahamas. Police learned this from his girlfriend, who once again explained that Lugo was on a secret CIA mission. When Lugo arrived in the Bahamas, 10 police cars were waiting for him. At trial, Detective Dubois confronted investigators, asking why Frank and Christina Griga had to pay such a horrific price for police inaction. After this public disaster, authorities charged everyone connected to the case, even people who helped alter vehicle identification numbers. John Mies, the notary and gym owner, received 50 years in prison. Delgado received 15 years due to full cooperation with authorities. Sabina walked free for the same reason. Carl Weeks received 10 years, as the court ruled he had been heavily influenced by the gang. What about the leaders? Lugo and Doorball were sentenced to death for their extreme brutality in 1998. However, the sentence was never carried out due to endless appeals, and both men remain alive today. In December 2024, their death sentences were overturned, and a jury recommended life imprisonment for both instead of the death penalty. The film also left out the final twist. Immediately after Mark Schiller finished testifying in court, he was arrested on the spot. For 3 years, the entire length of the investigation, federal agents had been building a case against him for massive medical insurance fraud totaling $14 million, and prosecutors demanded 25 years in prison. But the judge used his discretionary power, citing Schiller's courage, his cooperation with authorities, and the immense suffering he endured. In the end, Schiller received the minimum sentence, just 4 years, and was released after serving 2. So, tell me, did I overload this with details, or was it worth it? The Stanford Prison Experiment, 1971. You may notice that I'm starting with the year of the experiment, not the movie. Why? It's very simple. These events inspired 3 different films, and it's hard to choose just one. All 3 movies exaggerate what actually happened in real life, showing far more disturbing moments and violence than there ever was. So, I'm playing an Uno reverse card, and now, the next 7 or 8 minutes, instead of talking about films that softened reality, we're talking about films that made reality look much harsher than it really was. The first one, and without any doubt the best, is Das Experiment, 2001. This version is inspired by the real experiment, but it deliberately pushes everything to the edge. The actors are interesting, the tension builds quickly, and this movie leaves an uneasy feeling. Watching it today, the ending feels slightly rushed and, for some reason, even a bit unintentionally funny. But overall, the film works well, especially in its first half. The second version is The Experiment, 2010, starring Adrian Brody and Forrest Whitaker. I remember watching it about 11 years ago. In fact, I saw this movie before the original German film. I didn't like it much back then, and rewatching it now only confirmed my impression. It's okay, but the original movie is more disturbing and more interesting to watch. This version feels much more Hollywood style. But Brody and Whitaker work as a kind of compensation. Like the original, this film also includes many fictional elements that have nothing to do with what actually happened in real life. The third version is The Stanford Prison Experiment, 2015. This film stays closer to real events, but it still contains many differences, including fictional characters and invented situations. However, it remains the closest film to what actually happened in real life. Many scenes were reconstructed based on real events and footage from the actual experiment. And it actually does a great job of accurately replicating many details. Today, we'll focus more on the real experiment, using clips from the films as visuals. We'll avoid spoilers for the original Das Experiment, 2001, and The Experiment, 2010, and we won't discuss the endings. And yes, this channel is still about movies. The Stanford Prison Experiment was conducted in 1971 by psychologist Philip Zimbardo at Stanford University. The idea was simple but radical. He wanted to see how ordinary people would behave when placed in a simulated prison environment. Zimbardo asked volunteers, all college students, to sign up for a study about prison life. They would be randomly assigned roles, prisoners or guards. The goal wasn't to create violence. Zimbardo wanted to test a question that still fascinates psychologists today. Are people inherently bad, or does a corrupt environment turn them into bad actors? He wanted to see how quickly people adopt the behaviors and attitudes of the roles assigned to them, and how power, authority, and social pressure could influence normal individuals. The students were promised payment of $15 a day, which is roughly $100 to $120 today, and their roles, prisoner or guard, were assigned by lottery. The experiment was scheduled to last 2 weeks, but as you'll see, it spiraled out of control in just a few days. From the very first day of the experiment, the participants were placed in harsh conditions. For example, the prisoners weren't just asked to show up. They were arrested at their homes by real police, taken to the station, fingerprinted, photographed, stripped naked, and deloused. Each prisoner was given a number instead of a name, thin robes and chains around their ankles. A constant reminder that they were now part of the system, designed to erase personal identity and emphasize the loss of individuality. At first, people laughed. Some guards felt awkward. Prisoners tried to be cooperative. It still felt like an experiment, but by the end of the first day, something had already shifted. people stopped saying, "I'm playing a guard," or "I'm pretending to be a prisoner." They just were. By the second day, the experiment reached a turning point. The prisoners, exhausted by constant orders, mockery, and loss of control, decided to rebel. They ripped off their ID numbers, blocked doors with mattresses, and openly refused to follow commands. Their rebellion triggered an aggressive response from the guards and gave them justification to escalate psychological punishments. The guards began to believe that the prison belonged to them and that it was their responsibility to enforce discipline. By that point, the boundaries between reality and role-playing were already beginning to blur. The participants were still students, but they were slowly starting to believe in their assigned identities, guards and prisoners, accepting the prison environment as something real and unavoidable. The guards responded by reorganizing the prisoners into controlled groups, removing mattresses from certain cells, isolating perceived ringleaders, and forcing prisoners to perform humiliating tasks. Some were ordered to scrub toilets on their hands and knees. Others were forced to stand in stress positions or repeat degrading exercises for long periods. Sleep became irregular, and punishments became unpredictable, which increased tension and fear inside the prison. Despite how deeply many guards embraced their roles, often displaying sadistic tendencies through constant humiliation, harassment, and psychological pressure, some later claimed they were influenced by instructions from Dr. Zimbardo himself. No truly reliable scientific experiment should involve direct behavioral guidance or active participation from anyone, but especially from the lead researcher. According to Dave Eshelman, the most aggressive and well-known guard in the experiment, he believed he was not truly part of the study at all. He later said he thought his main job was to break the prisoners and create an authentic prison atmosphere. But for me, even if there were instructions to be harsh, the way this man acts, even after so many years, shows that he has no remorse for what he did to the other students. When he was younger, he tried to justify his behavior in one way, but later claimed that Zimbardo instructed them.
I didn't see where it was really harmful. It was degrading, and that was part of my particular little experiment to see how I could...
Your particular little experiment.
Yes,
Why don't you tell me about that?
I was running little experiments of my own.
Tell me about your little experiment.
Okay.
I'm curious.
I wanted to see just what kind of verbal abuse that people can take before they start objecting, before they start...
Zimbardo did encourage the guards to do whatever was necessary to simulate real prison conditions, and told them to be harsh guards, but he never explicitly instructed them to commit abuse or cruelty. There are also recorded briefings where Zimbardo and his team advised guards to be firm and tough in order to maintain control and create a realistic prison environment. However, Eshelman later claimed that he could sometimes hear reactions from Zimbardo's team behind the observation wall. He believed the researchers approved of his behavior, which pushed him to escalate his actions even further, thinking that this was exactly what the research team wanted to see. Yet, on day 3, we can clearly see that some guards, like Eshelman, naturally became harsher than others. Zimbardo later argued that this was the central mystery of the experiment, the fragile line between individual personality and the environment that surrounds it. All participants were college students, generally considered psychologically stable, with average moral standards. Some argue that if older individuals with stronger or more established moral principles had been placed in the same situation, the outcome might have been different. By day 3, the psychological strain intensified. One prisoner went on a hunger strike. Another refused to obey and was locked in a tiny closet for hours. Guards used deception to keep prisoners paranoid, convincing them there were informants among them. They rewarded obedience and punished resistance. Every aspect of prison life, from meals to restroom breaks, became a tool for control. Humiliation and unpredictability were constant. By day 4 and 5, the breakdown was undeniable. Prisoners were crying, panicking, and in some cases, lashing out violently. Guards exhibited increasing sadism, especially during night shifts or when prisoners were isolated. The scene showing in 2015 year movie where Zimbardo telling prisoners that leaving was nearly impossible are actually close to what happened in real life. Technically, participants had the right to quit the experiment at any time. However, in practice, the situation was much more complicated. When some prisoners asked to leave, they were treated as if they were applying for parole rather than simply quitting a study. They were told to file formal complaints, speak with staff, and wait for decisions, which made the environment feel like a real prison system rather than an experiment they could walk away from. This psychological pressure blurred the line between reality and role play, Some prisoners genuinely began to believe they had lost their freedom, even though they were volunteers. On the 6th day, Zimbardo's fiancée came to visit the experiment, and what she saw shocked her to the core. Guards were openly humiliating the prisoners, testing their boundaries, and the psychological pressure had become unbearable. That same day, the experiment was officially shut down. Now, in the films, the endings are different, so don't worry about spoilers. Feel free to watch Das Experiment, 2001, if you haven't seen it. As for the Stanford Prison Experiment, 2015, it does a decent job showing the experiment itself, even though it includes fictionalized elements, like brutality that never actually happened, and the doctor being portrayed as almost inhuman, willing to do anything in the name of science. On YouTube, you can also find real footage of the experiment. One of the most fascinating parts is the post-experiment interviews between guards and prisoners. Seeing their reflections and reactions is truly eye-opening. You'll also notice that the 2015 movie did a great job capturing the students and the atmosphere of the experiment. There's also a brilliant Vsauce video where they recreated the experiment in a milder, ethical way. There is also a very detailed National Geographic video about this case. I used footage from it, so if you can't tell where the real footage ends and the National Geographic reenactments begin, you don't need to. That's actually the whole point. So, was the experiment humane? Absolutely not. Was it necessary? Without a doubt, yes. We can say that Zimbardo influenced the guards, but if we look at him as part of the experiment, almost like a force granting authority and showing them the rules of cruelty, the experiment still has immense value. How many times have we seen history repeat itself? Cruelty hidden behind ideals and justifications. It's a lesson that's still relevant today, in schools, workplaces, prisons, and even online communities. Humanity, it turns out, is not just about individuals. It's about the systems we create around them. The Exorcism of Emily Rose, 2005. This film and the real-life events behind it are among the most discussed and well-known cases I've ever come across. Yet, the story of Anneliese Michel is still worth talking about. It continues to spark debate even today, and we'll try to make sense of it. The real story is far more disturbing, and we'll even listen to a few actual recordings, so brace yourselves. But before we begin, there's one thing I need to do.
Well, hello there. This is my real voice. Nice to meet you. And if you found this part without scrolling, I just want to say thank you for supporting this channel. I know that my voice might sound a little ridiculous, I'm not a native speaker, but I'm ready to be your monkey for today, because I'm always trying to keep my promises. So let's talk more about Emily or Anneliese Michel. This is honestly one of my favorite horror movies. I remember watching it for the first time during my school years. Around that time as well, I also heard a real recording of Anneliese Michel, which one of my classmates somehow shared with me via Bluetooth or infrared. In these records, you can hear the last exorcism session performed on Anneliese Michel. But we'll listen to them later. For now, let's start from the very beginning. In 1952, in a small town called Liebenfeld in West Germany, a girl named Anneliese Michel was born into a deeply religious Catholic family. From a very young age, religion played a crucial role in her life. Her parents were strict and devoted, and her faith shaped much of her upbringing. For most of her childhood, Anneliese appeared to be an ordinary girl. She did well in school, was described as polite and kind, and dreamed to become a teacher one day. But unfortunately, everything began to change when she became 16 years old. In 1968, Anneliese experienced what doctors later diagnosed as her first epileptic seizure. Not long after, she began to suffering from additional episodes, including blackouts, trembling, and periods where she claimed she couldn't control her body. Doctors prescribed medication and eventually diagnosed her with temporal lobe epilepsy, a condition known to cause seizures and in some cases hallucinations with altered states of consciousness. However, despite medical treatment, Anneliese's conditions continued to worsen. She started reporting disturbing experiences, claiming she could hear voices, see demonic faces, and feel an overwhelming sense of dread, especially during religious activities. According to her accounts, she began to feel as if something was controlling her, preventing her from praying and forcing her to act against her will. As her behavior became more extreme, her family grew increasingly convinced that what was happening could not be explained by medicine alone. By the early 1970s, Anneliese's behavior became increasingly alarming. She reportedly began refusing food, tearing at her clothes, and reacting violently to religious objects. She claimed she could not enter churches and said that she felt physical pain when hearing prayers or seeing sacred images. Her parents, deeply religious themselves, believed she was possessed and sought help from the Catholic Church. Initially, the church refused to perform an exorcism, insisting that she continue with medical care. However, as her condition deteriorated over the next several years, her family persisted in their requests. In 1975, after reviewing her case, a local bishop finally gave permission for official exorcism ritual to be performed. Two priests, Father Ernst Alt and Father Arnold Renz, were assigned to conduct the rites. Over the following 10 months, Anneliese underwent dozens of exorcism sessions. That is around 67 documented exorcism sessions over nearly a year. During these sessions, she reportedly spoke in different voices, claimed to be possessed by multiple demons. Audio recordings were made during some of these sessions. These records still exist today. So let's listen small part from it.
Ja, dit schrijflucht ohne dich!
By July 1976, she weighed only around 30 kilograms, which is 66 pounds. Unfortunately, she died from starvation and dehydration, a fact confirmed by medical and court reports. Following her death, her parents and two other priests were charged with negligent homicide. The court found that her death could be prevented with the proper medical care. How is that ended for priests? You will know after watching the movie. It's definitely worth your time. This case remained one of the most controversial to this day. Medically, Anneliese suffered from epilepsy and psychiatric disorders, but her family and the priest around believed she was possessed. If you ask me, I think she was not possessed at all. I also believe that her condition was primarily related to psychiatric issues. The sounds, the Latin words, and her speech can be explained by the fact that Anneliese grew up in a deeply religious environment and was a devout person, just like her parents. Even if she didn't consciously know Latin, it could have stayed in her subconsciousness. What do you think? Write in the comments below. What about the movie? The Exorcism of Emily Rose was released in 2005. While it's inspired by real events, the filmmakers took many liberties to dramatize the fact. First of all, the setting was moved from Germany to United States. The famous scene with the stigmas never actually occurred. This was simply a way for the filmmakers to visualize the extreme mental and physical states Anneliese went through. The exorcism sessions themselves are compressed and dramatized. Also, there is a need to mention a main role. Jennifer Carpenter, known for her role as a Dexter's sister, delivers a really impressive performance. She brings so much intensity that even scenes that could be just scary become emotional. Carpenter later said that she studied how the body reacts during seizures, extreme fear, and stress. People on the set mentioned that she got so deep into the role that her movement and voice sometimes scared the filming crew. I believe many fans will agree with me that her physical and emotional performance is the main reason why this movie is still so memorable. Yet, real life was even more disturbing because real people suffered. There were medical neglect, extreme religious pressure, and serious mental illness. If you look at the story through Anneliese's illness, instead of real medical help, she went through 67 exorcism sessions. Because of her fate and condition, these sessions were basically a torture for her. Yet, I'm sharing only my opinion, and some people believe she was really possessed. So, what do you think about this case? Just write in the comments below. Also, let me know if my voiceover is not a total crap. I'm glad to hear any feedback from you. Honestly, it's very hard for me to listen to my English, so for now, I'm switching back to my robotic version.
Yep, the old bot is back. And now, let's take a look at the final disturbing film for today. A movie where the real events were arguably far darker than what was shown on screen. Aguirre, The Wrath of God, 1972. This film is a true classic and, in my opinion, a genuine work of art. The story behind its creation, the relationship between Werner Herzog and Klaus Kinski, the real historical events that inspired it, and how they were brought to life. All of this, to me, is pure gold. For modern audiences, some scenes might even feel a little unusual or unintentionally comedic. But the film's goal was to immerse viewers in pure madness. and Herzog absolutely succeeded in that. But let me explain everything in more detail. I've already talked about Aguirre, the Wrath of God, on this channel before, but since that video didn't get many views, I think it deserves another chance. And this time, we'll go deeper into the story. In 1560, deep in the jungles of South America, a Spanish expedition set out in search of one of history's greatest myths, El Dorado, the legendary city of gold. What began as a desperate treasure hunt quickly turned into one of the most disturbing rebellions of the Spanish conquest. Among the soldiers was a conquistador named Lope de Aguirre. He wasn't the leader of the expedition, at least not at first. Historical records describe him as a violent, unstable, and deeply resentful soldier. Many historians believe Aguirre felt betrayed by the Spanish crown after years of brutal campaigns without recognition, wealth, or status. The expedition itself was led by Commander Pedro de Ursua, but almost immediately, everything started going wrong. The rainforest destroyed supply routes, disease spread rapidly, food ran out, soldiers began starving, morale collapsed. And inside this chaos, Aguirre began gaining influence. Slowly, he turned the soldiers against their commander, convincing them that they had been abandoned by Spain and sent on a suicide mission. Though in the film, Herzog focuses mostly on Aguirre's obsession with gold and that soldiers believe they can find it. Eventually, Aguirre staged a mutiny. Ursua was assassinated. Aguirre then installed a puppet leader, only to murder him as well shortly after, declaring himself commander of the expedition. According to historical chronicles written by surviving members, Aguirre quickly transformed into a paranoid tyrant. He executed soldiers over suspicion, rumors, or simple disagreement. As his forces moved through parts of modern Venezuela, Spanish troops began closing in. Aguirre's army started collapsing. Soldiers deserted. Supplies vanished. Control slipped away. At this point, Aguirre was no longer leading an expedition. He was leading a doomed rebellion. And in 1561, as Spanish forces surrounded him, Aguirre committed one of the most chilling acts recorded in colonial history. He killed his own daughter, Elvira. Shortly after, Aguirre himself was shot, most likely by his own men, hoping to earn mercy from Spanish authorities. His body was dismembered and publicly displayed as a warning to future rebels. His story became a terrifying symbol of how power, isolation, and obsession can completely destroy a human being. Now let's talk more about the film Herzog brought to life, and the differences between the movie and the real story. More than 400 years later, this story inspired one of cinema's most haunting films, Aguirre, the Wrath of God, released in 1972 and directed by Werner Herzog. But strangely, the production of this movie became almost as disturbing as the real events that inspired it. The film was shot deep in the Peruvian jungle under extreme conditions. The crew faced dangerous weather, disease, insects, flooding rivers, and total isolation. Equipment had to be transported through mountains and jungles. At times, filming felt closer to survival than filmmaking. However, the greatest danger on set wasn't the jungle. It was the actor playing Aguirre, Klaus Kinski. Kinski already had a legendary reputation long before filming began. He was known for violent temper outbursts, unpredictable behavior, emotional instability, and aggressive conflicts with directors and crew members. And Herzog knew exactly who he was hiring. Their relationship was explosive from day one. During filming, Kinski constantly screamed at crew members, insulted extras, and threatened to leave production multiple times. In one infamous incident, he fired a rifle near a group of extras and reportedly shot off the tip of one man's finger. There were also accounts of Kinski attacking people with real weapons during his violent outbursts. At one point, he reportedly tried to abandon the film completely. Herzog later claimed that when Kinski attempted to leave the jungle, he confronted him with a rifle and told him that if he walked away, he would shoot him, and then shoot himself with the remaining bullets. Whether that moment happened exactly as Herzog described is still debated. But what is confirmed is that their working relationship was extremely volatile, and Kinski stayed and finished the film. Even members of the local indigenous crew reportedly told Herzog they were willing to kill Kinski themselves because of how aggressively he treated people. Herzog allegedly refused, because he still needed his actor to finish the movie. And somehow, all that chaos translated directly into performance. Kinski's portrayal of Aguirre feels disturbingly real. Unpredictable, unstable, and completely detached from reality. But when comparing the film to real historical events, one crucial detail often gets overlooked. The movie portrays Aguirre's descent into madness as something slow, symbolic, and almost poetic. Herzog focuses on psychological horror, showing a man losing himself while chasing power and illusion. The film feels dreamlike, surreal, sometimes even strangely beautiful in its depiction of collapse. Real history, however, was far less poetic and far more brutal. In reality, Aguirre's rebellion involved repeated executions of his own men, killings driven by paranoia, and systematic elimination of anyone suspected of betrayal. Entire groups of soldiers were murdered simply to maintain control. Perhaps the most disturbing difference lies in Aguirre's final moments. In the film, he survives alone, drifting on a raft surrounded by monkeys, declaring himself emperor of a ruined empire. It's symbolic, tragic, almost mythological. But real history ends in something far more horrifying. Aguirre watched his army collapse, was abandoned by his own followers, and murdered his daughter in a desperate attempt to control her fate before being killed himself. To this day, Aguirre, The Wrath of God, is considered one of the greatest films ever made about obsession, ambition, megalomania, and madness. Its production remains one of the most chaotic and dangerous in cinema history. All right, that's it. This long video is finally over. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you made it to this point, thank you so much. That means a lot for this small channel. To be honest, I'm not even sure if this video essay turned out good or not, but I hope at least a few people enjoyed my work. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment about the video and my voiceover, which is most likely terrible, but I'd be glad to hear any feedback. So, take care of yourself, and see you in the next one.